Good afternoon, I should say. I appreciate everybody who actually came out with us because holy smokes, it's Sunday, and most of you should be in church. But you're not. You came here to be with me, which I appreciate, because I don't go to church either. And if you weren't in church and you weren't hungover from yesterday, this is as good a place as any to be. So thank you for coming out, to VegFest. For the 12 o'clock hour is really tough, so I'm glad to see so many faces here. How many folks here are already connected with me on Facebook? What? You will chat afterwards. This is amazing. So you already have an idea of what I talk about. For those of you who are not familiar with me, I'm Sebastian, and I work with vegan publishers as a staff writer. I also work at Vine Sanctuary as an off-site volunteer coordinator and also for Vine Sanctuary Press. Vine is a queer-run animal sanctuary in the northeastern part of the United States. And I also am the social media director for Peace Advocacy Network. And I'm here at VegFest today to talk about all of these things. I do a lot of different things, wear a lot of different hats on top of all this hair. So for the past almost 15 years, I've been working in print media, and a lot of the talks that I give, especially because I also lecture at Columbia University about speciesism and the way that speciesism interacts with anti-Black racism, class discrimination, gender identity, and all of these other related topics. Because I work in print media and have done for so long, I also have an affinity for talking about language and the way that we use words. And so this is a presentation that I put together that's kind of like Frankenstein from other presentations that I've done on race, class, and species and on media literacy. And this is just talking about the way that speech operates and a couple of speech theories. You can show speaking? Yeah. I'm sure you get my swim spot. Just to begin, how many people are familiar with the theory or the hypothesis of linguistic determination or linguistic relativity? Just 1, 2, 3, 4, 3.5 hands? Okay, we have 3.5 hands here, so this is going to be great. This is going to be a lot of fun. Language is one of those things that I really, really love to play with. This is the first time that I'm actually doing this specific presentation, like I said, because it's been cobbled together from other ones. So I hope I got all of the slides in the proper order because I was up pretty late last night. What we're going to start off talking about is the superior work hypothesis. Well, not that work. The superior work hypothesis. Not that work either. This work. This is the superior work hypothesis developed by Edward Sapir and developed by Benjamin Ward. It is again, about linguistic determination. A hypothesis first advanced by Edward Sapir in 1929, later developed by Benjamin Ward, that the structure of a language determines a native speaker's perception and categorization of experience, which is fascinating. There are several examples of this. And this is one example right here. This is the Hopi time controversy. And I'm just going to go over this slide right quick. The debate originated in the 1940s when American linguist Benjamin Ward argued that the Hopi Indians conceptualized time differently from the standard average European speaker, and this difference correlated with grammatical differences between the languages. He argued that Hopi has no words, grammatical forms, construction, or expressions that refer directly to what we call time, and concluded that the Hopi had no general notion or intuition of time as a smooth, flowing continuum in which everything in the universe proceeds at an equal rate out of future through the present and into the past. So, this idea that language actually constructs our reality is something that has been explored time and time again. This discussion has actually been settled since that time. Of course, the Hopi people do experience time, and they do have a concept of time. It's just different from the way that we conceptualize time. Which is also really interesting because who else do we think of when we think about persons who don't experience time the same way that we do? Does anyone have a dog at home? Yeah. When you leave for 5 minutes and then you come back because your dog acts super excited, holy shit! You have been gone for days! Never to have been seen again, I nearly died. Yeah. That's oftentimes what happens. Fun fact though, actually, smaller mammals do experience time differently than the way that we do. Like the smaller you are, like time seems to, so far as we're able to observe it, occur for smaller beings in slow motion. So when you think of like a mouse or even a housefly, the way that they experience time is very, very differently than we do. So yeah, days, hours for some beings can actually appear to be days. It's much longer. So the shorter your lifespan, the smaller you are, the more differently you are more likely to experience time than a human does. Worf used the Hopi concept of time as a primary example of his concept of linguistic relativity, posits the way in which individual languages encode information about the world, influences and correlates with the cultural worldview of the speaker. Worf's relativist views fell out of favor in linguistics and anthropology in the 1960s, with the statement lived on in popular literature, often in the form of the urban myth, the Hopi capital time. So again, that has actually been disproven. It's just that they experience time differently than we do. Also, another fun fact, is anyone in here bilingual? Okay, there are a lot of bilingual people. You did not raise your hand, keep in that room. You're not? Dutch. Proud of it. Dutch and proud of it. But yeah, it's often been said actually that the bilingual people experience time differently than monolingual people. Because of course you have different words to express time. Like I think that if, I'm just using this as an example, I might use this poorly. Some people, I think in Spanish, when you talk about I'm going to take a break, some people will say I'm going to take a small break, versus Northern European people who might say that like I'm going to take a short break. And the way that you express that actually manifests itself differently in your mind. But of course, there are examples of other ways that language can be used as well that are extremely oppressive. This is an example that actually came out of a children's textbook, a primary school textbook, as a matter of fact. I don't know if everybody can see this, so I'm just going to read the text here. Under moving out, it says, when the European settlers arrived in the United States, because I'm American, so this came from an American textbook, they needed land to live on. And the First Nations people agreed to move to different areas to make room for the new settlements. That is absolutely not what happened whatsoever. Yeah, you all can totally laugh at that, because that's not what happened. I also love the fact that like they're called the European settlers, and not like, the colonizers who came and like snatched up the land from the natives who were already living there, minding their own business. This is another example. Textbook passage, this came from The Guardian, refers to slaves as workers, and it prompts outcry. McGraw-Hill Education apologizes and promises to fix a passage that implies African slaves came to the United States as economic migrants, which is also particularly compelling considering if you're following the United States news media right now. There's conversations about people who are immigrating to the United States, and they're doing their level best to keep them out of the country. Whereas just a couple of short centuries before, black people were coming here as economic migrants looking for work, and lucky us that we were able to find it on plantations. Woo-wee. But yeah, this is the thing about language. I'm sure that most of you are probably sitting here asking yourselves, what does this have to do with animals right now? Language has the capacity to reveal, but language also has an equal capacity to conceal. This image that you're looking at is actually, has anyone seen this image before, by the way? This is very, very eerie. What you're looking at are skulls of several thousand bison, American buffalo, that have been slaughtered. And this actually appears in my talk on race, class, and species as well. Because we don't normally talk about the ways that race interacts with speciesism. As a matter of fact, in general, like academic discussions, we talk about racism, and we almost completely erase or invisibilize animal victims of racial oppression as well. Because these bison were slaughtered by the European settlers as a means to eradicate a food source for the First Nations people who would kill bison quite sparingly. This is an American animal that was just all over the landscape. You could find them everywhere a couple of centuries ago. And in a very short amount of time, they were killed almost to extinction. And this should rightfully be contextualized as a genocide. And it's not. So when I say that there are ways in which language can be used in order to oppress, in order to conceal, this is what we're talking about. We don't even recognize these animal victims as persons who are victims of a genocide. And because I have been working in print media for so long, I'm a technical writer and also a copy editor. And there have been jobs that I've gotten, like in the past, where I've been relieved of my duties because I contextualize things in a way that people are oftentimes very, very uncomfortable with, especially when you're doing technical writing for academia, for science, for medical journals, for things of that nature, for any type of environmental reports or things like that. It's really, really unsettling when someone actually comes in and rewrites sections of text to include other victims of oppression. And yeah, there have been times when this is coming to conflict with certain contracts that I've had, and because this is a difference that I am quite normally unable to come to terms with in an agreeable way, like our professional relationships have ended. And this is just an example. This is the text that you see out here. This is actually from Smithsonian Magazine, a very popular publication in the United States. And I'll just read the text to you again for the folks that are in the cheap seats. Not long after President Abraham Lincoln signed the Pacific Railway Act of 1862, railroad financier George Francis Train proclaimed the Great Pacific Railway commenced. Immigration will soon pour into these valleys. Immigration, once again. 10 millions of immigrants will settle in this golden land in 20 years, not that there were already people living there. This is the grandest enterprise under God. Yet while Train may have envisioned all the glory and possibilities of linking the East and the West coasts by a strong dam of iron, he cannot imagine the full and tragic impact of the Transcontinental Railroad, nor the speed at which it changed the shape of the American West, for in its wake the lives of countless Native Americans were destroyed, and tens of millions of buffalo, which have roamed freely upon the Great Plains since the last ice age 10,000 years ago, were nearly driven to extinction in a massive slaughter made possible by the railroad. And this is actually quite good by my standards for text that's published in a major publication like this one. But again, what I said before about the ways that language can be used to conceal, let's just pay attention to this sentence. For in its wake, the wake of the Transcontinental Railroad, the lives of countless Native Americans were destroyed. We're destroyed. That's very passive voice. We're destroyed by whom? We're destroyed by what? And so we're absenting from the conversation the subject, who actually destroyed their lives, who actually took the lives of the Native Americans and the buffalo. And that's a very subtle way in which language manifests itself in a way that is oppressive, in a way that hurts communities. Because when we don't name oppression meaningfully and contextualize it, then the conversation shifts dramatically. The person or persons who are responsible for it avoid culpability, avoid accountability. And we need to be very mindful of that. We need to be mindful of that for one another. And when we get to larger conversations about the use of language when we talk about other animals, this is another way that it manifests. The phrase fragmentation, if anybody was here yesterday and you attended Carol Adams' talks on the sexual politics of meat and her talk about Protest Kitchen, she talks about the fragmentation of animal bodies and of women's bodies and the objectification of animals. I was actually looking for images, just by the way, of chickens to include in a separate presentation. I don't know, you can take out your phones if you want to and try this experiment for yourself. But when I actually type in the word chicken into a Google search, it is incredibly hard to find images of live chickens. The standard image of chicken, when you just type that word so innocently into a Google search engine, is to come up with fragmented bodies that have already been destroyed, cooked, and are being served. So they are already fragmented in our immediate consciousness when we look at their images online, and this is something that we largely don't even think about in common discourse, because chickens don't exist as persons. Our language and the way that we have constructed it, particularly in English, conceptualizes chicken as an object. Chickens are already objectified. They're not independent individual persons. Our immediate association by the construction of language is of chicken as a thing, as a drumstick. Steaks are things. They're not cows. They're not persons in any meaningful sense. And this is a damage. This is the way that we talk about animals. But if we have the ability to talk about animals as objects, we also, everybody here in this room, has the capacity to address animals as persons with individual identities. We have that power within ourselves to shift conversations when we're talking with our counterparts out in daily life, to talk about animals in a meaningful way that preserves the integrity of their identities as individuals. And here's another way that I think all of us might have been guilty of at one time or another. Another way that the language, I love the image of the cat. I actually included that because I thought that was pretty cool. But another way that we describe animals is, or that we objectify animals, is to call them an it. Now, I do a whole separate conversation or another lecture on queering animal liberation and the importance of pronoun use when we're talking about other animals. And this has been talked about extensively by other speakers as well. Patrice Jones, also from Blind Sanctuary, Pax, Himsa Geffen, who's a trans activist and vegan, have also talked about this. Animals don't really need to, because of course, hopefully everyone in here recognizes gender as a social construct. Since gender is socially constructed, it doesn't really matter to other animals if we refer to them as he or she. They don't have that same attachment to these pronouns that we do. But what does matter to other animals is that we should not refer to them as it. How many of us have been guilty of actually calling other animals it? Raise your hand, because I still do it sometimes. Of course you do. Of course you do. This has been a part of our consciousness for literally our entire lives until the point that we became vegan. And even after we understand veganism, and after we understand speciesism, we're still complicit in it. How could we not be? Because this is how we've been socialized into existing. This is how we talk. So of course, it would happen from time to time that we would still refer to another person or a person of another species as an object, because we have to unlearn the way that we talk. We have to reshape the way that we talk. We have to reimagine our realities, and we have to help other people do that as well. I have been definitely fired from projects because, I would rewrite sections of reports to actually call animals they. It doesn't matter if we call them he or she, but they are still a they. They're still a person of another species. And this is a thing that we actually do in the classroom at Columbia. We will sit around and, I'll ask people to write on the board. It's just one of the projects we do. All of the qualities or characteristics that confer personhood on someone. The ability to create art, music, just all of these things. Not a single one of the things that people write on the board, we've done this for 5 semesters now, not a single one of the things that people write on the board is exclusive to humans, or just does not include persons of other species. Other species have cultures. We don't refer to them as cultures. Other species have societies. We may not call them societies, but they are. A dog pack, a wolf pack is a society. A murder of crows is a community of persons in some capacity. But again, language actually prevents us from recognizing that. I didn't include this slide. There's another slide that I actually wanted to include in this presentation, but I didn't put it in at the last minute. It's actually a picture of me taken from behind, and since I'm already here, you don't need the slide. This is me, this is my hair. Can anybody tell me this? If you've already seen me do this talk before, can anybody tell me what the chemical difference is between hair on humans and fur on other animals? That is correct. It's a trick question. There is no difference. There's no chemical difference between the hair that grows on humans, our heads, or our bodies, and the hair that grows on other animals. It's simply a linguistic difference. And for whatever reason that difference had manifested in English, however many centuries ago that we started talking about hair and fur, there really is no difference. But there are consequences for it. Language does create consequences for it because what grows on other animals has been commodified as a product, as a textile. And really, again, talking about the ways that race and species interact with one another, it has consequences for people who look like me as well. Because what you will be able to see if you search for headlines in the United States and in the UK is that black hair is criminalized to a certain degree. In the workplace, it's considered unprofessional. And even in classrooms, children have been sent home for having afro hair because it is called distracting. That's something that has happened in more than one school in the United States and here in the UK. And you can find these headlines at least a few times a year. So it does have consequences when we talk about hair on certain bodies, whether they're racialized consequences or species consequences. And our language, the way that we talk about this, should address these differences, should try to bring some sort of consistency to the discussion. And yeah, when we talk about other animals and the commodification or the ways that the ways that other animals are controlled, there is at the underlying, especially in the Western world, or particularly in the Western world, the underlying aggressor here that remains unnamed is that people of color and other species end up being objectified by white supremacist institutions. And that's a really scary thing to engage with, especially when I'm standing in front of a group of largely white people. But this is the reality of the situation. We have to have these difficult conversations in order to understand the ways that, it's probably different. In fact, I shouldn't say it's probably different, but it is different in different cultures. But we also need to have culturally specific conversations about speciesism, because the way that speciesism manifests in, say, Japan or China or India is going to be different from the way that speciesism manifests in the West, in the United Kingdom, in the United States. Because the influences on species of culture are different. The ways that cultures have evolved are different. So yeah, all of these things play into each other. Here's another one. What do you call this group of persons right here? What's that? That's what I would call them too, babies. What does the industry call them? Livestock. Language also has the power to conceal in that it erases individual identities. Oftentimes farmers don't distinguish between the persons that are a part of these social groups. This as a group collectively is just livestock. Literally a compound word, two words put together, living stock. This is a meaningful enslavement of other people. Oh, I just said a word, didn't I? How many people are uncomfortable with the word enslavement when we have these conversations? How many people have you talked to who are not vegan who are probably uncomfortable with yak? There are usually three words that people talk about that are really, really triggering in general conversation. And I get asked about this all the time, so we're making the presentation, we're going to include it. These three words are enormously sensitive to talk about for a lot of people, myself included. And rape, slavery, Holocaust are things that are probably going to really change the tenor of a conversation very quickly when we're having them out in the mainstream society, especially depending on who the audience is. Now, it's really funny, or not funny, but it's really interesting that yesterday, Carol Adams again, she addressed this in her presentation. I think that she may have addressed it in both her presentation on Protest Kitchen and the one that she did talking about the sexual politics of meat. She discourages people from using the word rape. I do as well, but we do for very different reasons. Carol's work contends that actually minimizing the experience of a cow, say a dairy cow, to simply rape erases all of the other experiences that this person goes through. It just hyper-focuses on one one particular type of trauma, rather than the trauma that this person will experience for their entire lives. From their birth, separation from her family, being objectified, sexualized, sexually exploited, having her own children and having them taken away, ultimately all the way up to the day of her death. These are all traumatic experiences, and Carol's perspective is that, just hyper-focusing on one experience for shock value isn't really productive. And it erases a lifetime of suffering that that person would experience. I've written about this myself as well, but I personally have a different take on it. I don't use the word rape because I don't think that rape alone actually does a service to animals when we're having these discussions about sexual violence. Because it's only one very specific form of sexual violence. And there are so many different types of victims of sexual violence and animal exploitation that we don't talk about. And we tend to hyper-focus on dairy cows, rather than focusing on the fact that sexual violence happens throughout animal exploitation to bulls. The semen with which cows are forcibly impregnated comes from somewhere. That is sexual violence. Companion animals who are bred into existence, that is sexual violence. And it's not simply limited to sexual violence. It's, on a much larger scale, reproductive violence. Because we can't just assume or presume that all animals are exploited sexually in the same way. No one is impregnating a chicken or a fish in the same way that they are exploiting a cow's reproductive system. And so I think that it's much smarter and much more inclusive to actually talk about this as reproductive violence, as sexual violence, than hyper-focusing on one species and crying the word rape. Which, again, is probably going to be incredibly triggering for a lot of people when we're having this discussion. But people can relate to sexual violence, and really we have to relate to sexual violence in the form of animal exploitation. Because the industry cannot survive without sexual violence. The industry cannot survive without reproductive violence. So it's important to talk about this. Slavery. Once again, like I said, it's incredibly difficult to talk about. It's scary to talk about. I personally take the position that we should actually recognize and name the system that other species live under as enslavement. There's no point in coming up with other words to describe it. There's no point in trying to sugarcoat it. This is meaningfully slavery of other species. What I would take issue with, however, is that I don't think that we should be comparing the enslavement of animals to the transatlantic, to the transatlantic slave trade. Because we don't do that when we're talking about other victims of slavery. When we talk about victims of sexual slavery, do we show images of the transatlantic slave trade? No, we don't do that. When we talk about child slavery, when we talk about wage slavery, when we talk about slavery in almost any other context, we don't reach for a comparison to a very specific time in American history and make that comparison. We only seem to do that in the animal rights community. And why do we do that? Because it is compelling, it is scary. But when white people do it, all too often, people are not engaging with their anti-blackness. And it lacks authenticity. It completely lacks authenticity when we do that. So we probably should leave that comparison alone. But to actually name animal slavery for what it is important. And the same goes for the Holocaust. I am not myself a Jewish person, so I don't really talk about Jewish experiences. But there's so much scholarship out there by Jewish people that actually does talk about the Holocaust in a meaningful way that addresses speciesism. Refer other people to that work. And it is incredibly enlightening. We also, however, should not completely erase the fact that both of these historical experiences are actually informed by and predicated upon animal abuse and animal exploitation. Has anyone in this room ever read The Dreaded Comparison? Okay, a few hands have gone up. This is an incredible academic resource that addresses animal enslavement and Black people's enslavement, and talks about the ways in which animal bodies were used in order to perpetuate anti-Blackness in American history. There are many more ways that we can talk about that, but we won't get into all of these things. I'm just being mindful of my time right now. I am going to wrap up here, but this is the way that I'm going to wrap up is by actually addressing language in one more way. This is a poem by Les Murray. If you all are not familiar with Les Murray, I definitely encourage you to get familiar with his work because he is a phenomenal poet. And his literature really, really resonates with me on a number of levels. This poem is called The Cows on Killing Day. And I think that Murray uses language in an incredibly impactful way. And we're just there are 4 slides, and we'll just go over each one of these slides and talk about the poem. And forgive me, because it's every time I do this, every time I present this, it gets a little bit emotional for me. And we'll explain why. All me are standing on sea. The sky is shining. All me have just been milked. Teats all tinkling still from that dry, toothless sucking by the chilly mouths, the gas loudly in, and never breathe out. All me. Again, this is a tremendous use of language that, if you are someone who is fascinated by language, you recognize what's happening here. Who is me? Anybody recognize that? The narrator of this is a cow. And she's using the compound first person, which I think is fascinating because when you think about it, if a cow or a person of another species were trying to learn English, they're not going to speak English as fluently as you and me, as if they were a Disney character. They're probably going to speak very broken English, and they're probably going to use their own sort of dialect, or sort of integrate their own dialect. That, again, really resonates with me, because when I look at some of the most amazing literary artists of the 20th century, when I look at the history of Black literary artists, we have done the same thing. Is anyone familiar with AAVE, or African American Vernacular English? Yeah. Sometimes people call it Ebonics. When we split infinitives and say, I be going down to the market. These are ways that we have used language ourselves, used the English language. And there's a set of rules. People talk about it as if this is just bad English. There's a very specific set of rules that goes with Ebonics, that goes with African American Vernacular English. You just don't recognize it. We do. All we are standing on feet, the sky is shining. Teeth all tingling still from that dry, toothless sucking by the chilly mouths, the gas valve in, and never breathe out. Her teeth are still tingling because she had been milked by a machine that constantly gasps in, never breathes out. So unnatural. Me facing in every way, spreading out over feed. One me is still in the yard, the place skinned of feed. Me, old and sore-boned, little milk in that me now, licks at the wood. The oldest bull human is coming. There's one cow, still there, in the berry yard. And she refers to a bull human. Why does she do that? Like a bull, but human. It's a male-bodied person. It's fascinating. I don't know if you all get off on this as much as I do. She's constructing gender as a cow. Murray has actually gone to the trouble. This is an incredibly fascinating piece of work. He's gone to the trouble of first of all, constructing language, and then, through the eyes of a cow, constructing gender. It's a bull human. This is what we're looking at. Me in the peat yard. A stick goes out from the human and cracks like the whip. Me shivers and falls down with the terrible, the blood of me coming out behind him here. Me, that other me, down and dreaming in the bare yard. Stick came out like a whip. She shivered and fell down. Anybody recognize that device? Yeah, she'd constructed a bolt gun. And now she's shivering. All we come running. It's like the hot part of the sky that's hard to look at. This that now happens behind wood in the raw yard. A shining leaf, like off the bitter gum tree, is with the human. A shining leaf. She can't describe it. But it's like off the bitter gum tree. It's with the human. It works in the neck of me. And the terrible floods out. Swamped and frothy. The terrible floods out. I know. It's hard, isn't it? She actually watched someone that she knows get murdered. And she has to find the word to describe this. And what's fascinating again also is that, I've shared this in several spaces. I've shared this in classrooms and Murray is not asking for sympathy for the cow. Murray is actually just describing how it is. Nobody is saying that you have to be vegan or vegetarian here. This is an artist who actually took the time to describe what happens, to actually recount what happens. I would hope that in the future someone holds us up as an example of what literature would look like if it were composed by persons of other species. Fortunately, I, as a Black American person, do have these experiences. You can go through any books that are written by Black people, where we are able to recount our experiences of living under a white supremacist society in which our lives have been exploited. And I am so proud of the people who are resilient enough to actually transcribe this and curate these histories. These are things that are denied to persons of other species, unfortunately. But Murray's work is phenomenal. Just in this one poem, and this isn't even a complete poem, just in these 4 short stanzas that I've shared with you, you get to see the experience firsthand of what it would probably be like if a cow were able to use language like humans do. Remember, language has the power to oppress, but language also has the power to liberate. And everybody who's in this room today, you have the power to walk out of here and use your language in a way that liberates other persons, racially, by species, by gender, in every way possible. And I know it's really intimidating to think about that right now, but it gives me so much hope. It's an incredible thing. One of the greatest weapons that we have at our disposal is the ability to communicate with one another. How fortunate are we that we have that opportunity to use that for ourselves and for other animals? I feel really, really blessed for that. Thank all of you for coming today. So, now I'm going to open it up for questions if you've got them. If you don't, you can definitely stay in this room. We're going to have an interview with Edric Kennedy McCoy, hosted by broadcast journalist from Time 175, Tom Lane. Edric, if you don't know, is actually one of the firefighters from the Grenfell Tower disaster very recently, and he is vegan. So there's going to be a one-on-one interview at 1 o'clock. o'clock. At 2 o'clock, I'll be right back here in this room. There's going to be a panel with myself and Jemima Weber, also hosted by Tom. If you came to yesterday's panel, this is going to be a continuation of that. We're not going to talk about exactly the same things, but we're going to definitely get into some really deep, really difficult to discuss topics. So, yes, questions if anybody has. Yes, right up in the front.
I'm not, I love it.
Yeah, but I know, the least like some folks can come to just how up you are, how rude you are, I see you, I feel you. Second of all, I just want to make a comment about, words in terms of like race, slavery, and Holocaust. So the people who actually kind of coined this like, animal holocaust, they were all Jewish vegans. Like all of them were doing that. And a lot of Jewish people talk about how they don't really refer to it as the Holocaust in their community. They call it the Shoah, which is it's a Hebrew term for what happened. Having that said, none of us who are not Jewish should actually be using that unless like we're like quoting Jewish vegans or saying, not the Shoah, but like if we're talking about animals and the Holocaust and comparing that, we should be talking about it contextually and saying like, well, actually, the Holocaust was meant as animal sacrifice. So that's what the word comes from. It comes from the Bible. That's like the whole name where it comes from. And so just kind of like having that contextually rather than being like, here's the picture of Jewish bodies and here's the picture of a pig. Like, better ways.
Better ways.
Better ways. But again, I love you so much. So I'm going to give you there later. But here, anyone else?
Thank you so much. Anybody else? Yes? You look really shy.
I just wanted to make a comment about that. I just feel like it's important to note that there wasn't just one Holocaust, there were multiple Holocausts in my country. We had a huge genocide where 30,000 people were killed. So I think like the term like animal holocaust can be used by people who weren't like victims of the Holocaust, but like still experienced genocide in the country, in my opinion. So.
I'm not going to disagree with you on that. Like, I have written about this as well online, and I'm sure that it's all over the internet. I don't even remember some of the places I've written it. But what's really interesting about this is that when you start to research Holocaust or and here's another phrase, concentration camps. I did not know until adulthood, which means that I went through my entire primary and secondary academic career not knowing this. I did not know that there were other Holocausts that happened. I did not know that the use of concentration camps was not specific to Nazi Germany during a very specific time in history. I did not know that the British Empire was responsible for them, even well after the Second World War had ended. How many people in this room can actually talk about the British Empire and concentration camps in Kenya? Okay, that's actually more than most people. This is a third of the hands went up. A lot of people don't know about that. A lot of people don't know about these things. And so, again, contextualizing these things in history and recognizing them is important. I also do think that it's incredibly unfair that when we talk about the use of race concentration camps, people get uncomfortable. Because, okay, concentration camps, and it's immediately people think, this is something that happened to Jewish people, so we shouldn't talk about it in our animal rights advocacy. Is anybody familiar with Sheriff Joe Arpaio in the United States? Maricopa County, Arizona sheriff, who actually bragged about the fact that his open-air detention centers for migrants and for immigrant people were concentration camps. And that had been reproduced throughout the media, and no one batted an eyelash. So, so when people oftentimes are getting upset or becoming offended at the use of terms that are commonly used for other human communities, but they get offended when we use them for animal persons who are experiencing similar circumstances, that's usually a sign that people are not really not really well versed or very literate in these areas. We've got time for one or two more questions. Oh, you've got a microphone.
So just going off that, what would you say when having these conversations where you use one of those words and people criticize those on the basis that it's derailing from the other victims? The other victims they're referring to are humans. Because, like you said, we have no problem applying those terms to other human populations. But anytime they're applied to animals, people say it's derailing, or dehumanizing, and things like that. And what's been interesting in my experience is that these are people who are already vegan. These are people who claim to already be animal advocates, and with the use of intersectionality, where everyone says, look at how different forms of oppression are connected. But there's so much resistance to using those same terms, or for lack of a better word, comparison. I just find myself very confused how people could say intersectionality is looking at the interconnectedness of oppression, but comparing different forms of oppression, human and non-human, is off limits. They just seem so, it just seems like a very contradicting statement. How would you counter that type of, and I'm not necessarily looking for a correct answer, I'm just clueless. How would you respond to someone saying something like that?
We are all a little bit clueless when we're trying to figure these things out ourselves. I feel like there are two questions there. The second part I'll address first because I feel like you're asking about comparisons. Again, I don't encourage people to make comparisons. I don't think that making comparisons is a productive thing. But to address the first part of your question, the use of actual terms, I definitely think that we should use these terms. And it's really funny that you said something that I have also experienced. I'm on camera, so this is going to get around. I don't care. I personally do not identify as an intersectional vegan. For reasons that I have written about quite extensively, you can read all about it on my own website, christophersebastian.info, all of the blog entries, that's been addressed and done to death. I do actually identify with intersectional feminism. I think that it's important. I think that it needs to be an important aspect of a radical framework for our veganism. It absolutely must be. It's integral to it. But I don't think of myself as a quote intersectional vegan because I think that kind of distorts the term and the community for whom it was created. But it's really interesting that what you say is the people who most commonly are uncomfortable with this are themselves vegan. When I usually have conversations with people, and this is based purely on anecdotal experience, if I am having an honest and authentic conversation with people about anti-blackness, about gender violence, and about species violence, I very rarely encounter someone who is who universally condemns this. Because if you come to people and you are authentic about engaging with your complicity in institutional oppression, a framework for total liberation, usually people identify with that. People can sense authenticity. And it is unfortunate, and an unfortunate reality that oftentimes, because there is such a low amount of literacy around racial violence, that a lot of people, white people, are not able to engage with anti-blackness. And so that is something that is unfortunate, that makes our conversations more difficult. But no, we should not refrain from using accurate terms to describe animal oppression just because some people are going to find it uncomfortable. One's discomfort, engaging with your discomfort, is a necessary part of dismantling oppression. I get uncomfortable when I hear women say, men do X, Y, and Z. I'm sure most guys in here probably have, at one point in their lives, had to fight the urge to say, not all men. Because that's our reaction. That's what we do. We as human beings, it's part of our condition to be uncomfortable with recognizing our complicity in systemic or institutional oppression against other marginalized communities. And yes, engaging with that discomfort is necessary. And sometimes people are going to shut down the conversation. That's fine. That's fine. I run into white people all the time who shut down the conversation about race because they're uncomfortable about engaging with their anti-blackness. If people are uncomfortable with engaging in their speciesism because they don't like to hear that animal enslavement is real, that's fine. That's something that's going to happen. It will happen. I can't stop it from happening.
You can't stop it from happening, but it will happen. And we will continue to have these conversations anyway, unapologetically. Because I'm not afraid of challenging white people on their racism. I'm not afraid of challenging humans on human supremacist institutions. We can't be. We have to have the courage of conviction in order to authentically engage in these conversations, even when people are afraid to do it. Did you have a question?
Yeah. Just to say, it's, I mean, as a Buddhist, there's this idea of skillful means, which means there's not one prescriptive way of dealing. Say, if you're speaking to someone, you know, like there's not just one way of speaking or one way of saying Holocaust, and not depending on how you intellectually decide it. It's the person who's receiving who you actually want to. And obviously, this depends on your amount of insight in yourself, in your perceptual style of how you can draw this person in to do it. So I think this needs to be said, along with all the, you know, I'm not trying to say this is the word we should use, but again, that, to me, is dependent on the amount of insight you have in yourself, in the situation, in the person. And that's obviously a wonderful piece for everyone, but I think that is something that needs to be said, and I never hear it being said. But I totally take on board everything you said, it's been brilliant, but that aspect is missing for me.
No, absolutely. Like, that does need to be said. It does need to be, like, addressed. Like, and I'm also glad that you raised the fact that, like, you know, talking about, like, prescriptivist approaches to activism.
Yeah.
Like, language, like, there are usually two approaches to language as well. Like, there is a prescriptivist approach to language, and there's also a descriptivist approach to language. Prescriptivist approaches to language in general means that, like, there is a rigid standard of rules and we're always supposed to follow them. If we did that, then we would all still speaking, like, Shakespearean or early English, and none of us do that. Language, from my perspective, should be descriptive, which means that language should follow the discourse. Language does follow the discourse. New words are added to the dictionary all the time. When we take descriptivist actions in our activism, we do follow the conversation. We have to engage with the individual on the individual level. That does have to be said. You don't just universally apply all of these rules at all times, because we don't take authoritarian approaches to any type of conversation that we have. This does happen on a one-on-one basis. I'm not going to kick in the door on a bunch of, like, you know, like Holocaust survivors, especially given what just happened in the United States in the past 24 hours, and say, guess what? Like, you know, Jewish people, it's Holocaust time, we're going to talk about that. Would never happen. That would be an absurd thing to do. So I'm really glad that you said that. It's absolutely a part of the way that we have to approach these conversations. It's not like a one-size-fits-all, like, you know, like approach. So that is deeply, deeply appreciated. And I think that we're out of time now because we have to get set up for the talk at like 1 o'clock. Thank everybody for coming.